Here we are now. We're live on Facebook. So our guest is Tom Biebighauser. Tom has been enthusiastically restoring wetlands and streams for 42 years. He has designed over 6,000 wetland restoration projects and has successfully supervised the construction of over 2,600 wetlands in 26 states across Alberta, British Columbia, and Ontario in Canada, New Zealand, Puerto Rico, and Taiwan. Tom builds over 150 wetlands each year and has developed highly successful and inexpensive techniques for constructing wetlands in urban areas, on rangeland, farmland, and in forested areas. He specializes in planning and building wetlands and streams that provide habitat for endangered and threatened species of animals and plants. Tom, welcome.
Well, thank you. Appreciate the invitation to be here tonight.
So, Tom, you've designed over 6,000 wetlands, and that's quite a commitment. And I can tell in your voice that you really love your work. Tell us about the path that led you to become a wetlands restoration specialist.
It started in 7th grade. My science teacher took us out on a field trip to a wetland area. This was in the state of Minnesota, where there were wetlands everywhere in the landscape. And I really enjoyed that field trip. He got me going on an independent project, and I thought, this is really fascinating. I really like all the wildlife I see in wetlands, all the unique plants, and this is something I'd like to do. So it started quite a few years ago. And then when I was in high school, I took a class on trapping and learned how to trap muskrats and mink in the wetlands in Minnesota. So that showed me even more about wetlands and there are many values to wildlife species. So it's just hard to stay away from these fascinating areas.
Right. You mentioned going to British Columbia and also the Baja Peninsula in Mexico and also Ohio. What have you been working on lately?
Well, my trips to Canada started in 2003. I was instructing a course in Minnesota where we were building wetlands for American Wetlands Day that used to be celebrated. And there were quite a few people there. And this woman approached me and she had this delightful English accent. And she said she was from British Columbia. Would I be interested in helping them to instruct a course in BC? And I said, well, I think so. So I talked to the US Forest Service people. I was working for the Forest Service at the time, and they supported my going to BC. And that started trips to Canada and helping people to design and build wetlands for rare species all across British Columbia and Alberta. But the work in Mexico, I've been volunteering to help biologists in Mexico who are interested in helping the California red-legged frog. The California red-legged frog is an endangered species in California. They have found a population in Mexico, and this population is also faced with extinction. So I've been working with some people to design wetland projects in the Baja of California, and we've been designing these wetlands. And now we have 13 wetland projects designed on arid rangeland. And these are historic populations of the California red-legged frog. If we were able to restore these wetlands, we could provide habitat to a genotype that is now gone from the state of California. So we're going to be asking for contributions towards these projects. They're quite inexpensive. The ranchers are so dedicated, but what really struck me about being in Mexico is how the standard of living is not quite what I'm used to in the United States, and how much you can get done for significantly less money in Mexico. So these will be a good investment, and I'm anxious to return and help them to build the wetlands in the desert. I think, looking back at 42 years working as a wildlife biologist, the number one thing we can do to help wildlife is to protect or to restore a wetland area, because we now have the technology to build wetlands that will last forever with little, if any, maintenance. And there are so few projects that we can complete that have that type of a record.
So, why would you expect or not expect maintenance to be required? Do people think in their minds that that once you do a project, it's just going to dry up at some point, or it's going to be,
Well, if you
damaged?
travel around Kentucky and
Mhm.
Tennessee, you'll see all these farm ponds that were built, many of them in the 1940s and 50s and 60s. And they have one thing in common. They have a dam. Somebody's built a dam. And when you look at wetlands that have been built since the 1930s, just about every one has been built by constructing a dam. And a dam is designed to impound water, to back up water. And most dams are built across streams. Well, people built dams across streams because they didn't know how to build wetlands or ponds without the use of dams. And they thought if they dammed a stream, it's going to hold water. Well, one thing we know, wherever you live in the world, you're going to have a flood sometime. And when there's that flood, how does water go around the dam and not cause erosion? Mm-hmm. How does water, if water goes over the dam, it will cause erosion. And this is what's happened to so many of these ponds and wetlands that have been built in North America, is there's been a flood or several floods, the dams have washed out and caused great erosion, and they don't hold water anymore. So over the years, I've learned how natural wetlands appear and function, and I see that they don't have constructed dams. They may have a slight rise along the lower edge. That's part of the landscape. So I started building wetland areas to resemble natural wetlands without the use of dams. And I found in so doing that I can build a wetland that I think will last forever. So now when I build a wetland, I'll turn to the people I'm working with and said, I'll ask them, how long would you like your wetland to last? They look at me and I said, would you be happy with 1 year? Oh, no. 2 years? No. 5 years? Well, maybe. Really, how long do you want it to last? They say at least 15 years. You know what? They're not telling the truth. People want them to last a lot longer.
Right.
So when you build a wetland or a pond with a dam, you are lucky if it lasts 2 years. But when you build without one, I think you can guarantee it for hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. So now I'll say to them, I'll guarantee this for 100 years. This is especially fun when I build a wetland at a school and I'm out there with the students, and I'll say, I will guarantee this wetland for 100 years. In fact, in 90 years, I want you to send a picture to me with an email. And they look at me and they say, are you serious? I said, well, look at how many years Noah lived. I want to live at least that long. There's a lot of wetlands to build in a lifetime.
Right.
But seriously, people use dams because that's how they've been taught. I teach engineers how to build wetlands, and I find out that they were shown how to build wetlands by building dams. And it is the greatest challenge to show folks that they don't have to build a dam. In fact, it's challenging and expensive to build a dam. And when you build a dam, you block aquatic organism passage, you divert flows. They look unattractive, and especially they require maintenance. So in the last 15 years, I've been removing dams and teaching people how to remove dams, to restore streams, and to restore wetlands. And I'm hoping that we can start doing more of that work in the Midwest here. They're really embracing it in Canada. I have a lot of projects going on in Canada. We're removing dams, restoring wetlands and streams, but very few in the US. But I think that will change. And that's why I appreciate you bringing me on the program tonight, and we can talk about this and other good things.
It's my pleasure. So I'm intrigued by you saying that you don't have to build a dam. So if you don't build a dam to hold back the water, how do you create a wetland?
It's all about reshaping the landscape, and something to think about. Any place that we identify to build a wetland, more than likely it used to be a wetland and somebody's drained it. And I give presentations on drainage, and you think they put people to sleep, but actually they help us look at the landscape differently. And after listening to one of these presentations, people will say to me, Now I look at the land completely different, and I'm driving down the interstate and I start going off the road because I see a drained wetland.
Mhm.
And that's what happens. They're the ghosts of drained wetlands everywhere on the landscape. And when you learn to recognize how wetlands have been drained and filled, then you see to reshape these natural basins, you don't have to build a dam. We're restoring the contours, the gradually sloped basin that's a wetland. And all wetlands occur in shallow basins. Now, these basins are positioned on sloping land. There is no flat land in the world. And that's something significant. We all think there's flat land. No, all land has a slope and water will run off of it. And you realize then that natural wetlands occurred in shallow basins on slopes. And so if you're on high ground overlooking a farm field and you see a shallow basin, more than likely that used to be a wetland, but somebody has drained it. They've drained it by digging ditches, and they've drained it by filling in the basin. So when you learn to recognize these features, you say, oh, there's a ditch. Why do people build ditches? To drain wetlands. And I've dug ditches on our farm here in Kentucky, and it's no fun. I mean, digging a ditch is almost punishment. And you realize the reason you dig a ditch is that you're having a problem with water. Water is saturated in an area. Maybe your cows are getting stuck in the mud. Maybe your horses are getting thrush on their feet. There's all sorts of problems with having livestock and crops on wet land. So people have been draining wetlands ever since the Europeans started colonizing North America. They've been draining wetlands and digging these ditches to drain them because they needed dry land for farming and for their livestock and for building their homes. Mm-hmm. Nobody likes water in their basement. You dig ditches. So if you recognize ditches on the landscape, that is the clue to identifying where you can restore a wetland. And you can give me an aerial photograph of most anywhere in North America, and I'll be able to identify ditches where wetlands have been drained. And people talk about what percent of wetlands have been drained on the landscape. And I believe they're greatly underestimating how many wetlands have been lost, because the real clue to wetland loss is the identification of ditches. Now, years ago, there was some work done, and they said the clue to identifying a drained wetland is hydric soil that's being farmed. Soil that's saturated and it's still being farmed. Well, that's not a good clue, because farmers have learned to get the water out of the soil because you can't farm saturated soil. It kills the crops. So the real clue to identifying drained wetlands is to look for ditches. And you find a ditch, you found where somebody's had a problem with water, and you have an opportunity to bring that wetland back.
So instead of draining, so you're saying you don't want to dig ditches, so can you give an example of what to do and what not to do when you found a potential wetland?
Well, if you have found a wetland area, you're going to know it because it may have cattails growing in it, sedges and rushes. How do you know it's a wetland? Well, if you're afraid to drive through it because you'll get stuck, it could be a wetland. If you walk through it and your feet get wet, more likely it's a wetland. Right. Now we can get into the legal definition of wetlands, the presence of water during the growing season, hydrophytic plants, hydrophytic soil, but really these are areas where you'll see red-winged blackbirds, mallard ducks, all these wildlife species that are associated with shallow water. And wetlands are undoubtedly the most productive ecosystems in the world. And how do we know that? First of all, most wetlands occur in sunlight. Where would you plant a garden? In a sunlit location. What do you have to do during the summer with your garden? You have to water it. A wetland's already watered in a sunlit location. The water is shallow and it's warm, and the wetland's going to produce a diversity of plants, an abundance of growth. So you can really say wetlands are the most productive ecosystems in the world. And also wetlands are the nursery to so many different animals because there's that shallow, warm water that's important for amphibians. And then there's so much for animals to eat. And that's what I see is when you restore or build a wetland area, you attract so many different animals that are looking for a place to hide and looking for something to eat. So they really are productive areas.
So when you build a wetland, there's probably a period of time where some species say, hey, I want to make my home here. And then other species come to eat them. And there's a period of like, there's a process. I don't know if you call it succession, but how does that happen? What are some of the exciting things that you've seen?
Well, when I first started building wetland areas, I had very learned people say to me that it's going to take hundreds of years for animals to colonize the site.
Right.
And then they give me their publications that were peer reviewed. And I'm looking at it going, well, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Maybe we should really think about this because these people are saying that if we build this wetland, the marbled salamander could take hundreds of years to colonize it. Or maybe mallards won't find it. Well, we started building wetlands and we found out while we were building them, animals were showing up and wouldn't leave. And we'd be in the middle of construction of a wetland and we'd get a hard rain, not quite a frog strangler, but a pretty good sized rain. And overnight, the great tree frogs would lay their eggs in the water. They found it. We started building wetlands on mountain ridges in Kentucky. And again, these people who had a whole lot more education than I did, they said, Tom, that is crazy. You're building wetlands on top of mountains. No animals are going to use those because everybody knows there never were wetlands there. Well, again, we found out within months, animals were colonizing these wetlands on ridges. The dragonflies found them, the damselflies, the water boatmen, the water striders, even the toads and the frogs hopped up to these mountains and started breeding. We had one wetland in Rowan County where we found eastern spadefoots breeding. And this is a species, when you get into literature, they said it would only breed in wetlands in valleys surrounded by sand. And here we had them breeding in wetlands on mountain ridge tops out of clay soils in a forested area. So it's something, the naysayers are very strong. Now, I believe the number one priority is to protect wetlands that are already on the landscape. But when you consider how many of them have been drained, if we say, oh, we're going to protect everyone that's there, you're really only protecting maybe 10% of the original wetlands, which is good. But the restoration opportunities are huge. And I have found that within 1 or 2 years, quite a diversity of plants and animals will find these wetlands with no help other than restoring the wetland area, which is really good news. In fact, we started building wetlands in schoolyards. I was working with educators and they said, Tom, we'd like to have a wetland at our school. The first wetland I built at a school was Tilden Hogg Elementary School in Rowan County. And the teacher, Mr. McManus, called my wife and I in for a conference. And it was with our son. And I thought, well, our son's a really good student, 6th grade student. I don't know why we're being called in for a conference. Well, Mr. McManus said the reason he called me in was that he wanted a wetland on the school grounds. And he heard I built wetlands. I had never built one at a school. So we planned for it and obtained the funding and the approvals. And we built this wetland at a school. And people said, animals aren't going to use it. I mean, you're at a school, there's kids all over the place. Well, when you go out to that wetland now, it is beautiful. And it's full of salamanders and frogs and dragonflies and red-winged blackbirds. And it'll be there for many, many years. So yes, animals find these habitats. They know what's good for them. You know, it's just like if a new restaurant opens up in town and it's a good restaurant, you're going to hear about it and you're going to go in there. It's the same thing with a wetland area. Animals hear about it, they see it. And I think many of them can smell water and they find these habitats which is really good news.
So they smell water. How else do they find their habitat?
You know, with the California red-legged frog that we're working with, that's a species that's considered a slow dispersal. And a biologist friend of mine has a theory on how the California red-legged frog finds these wetlands. So you have a lot of tree frogs, little tree frogs in California, and they're really noisy in the spring during breeding season. Unbelievable chorus. And you can hear this chorus over a mile away in the spring. And he thinks what's happening, this is Dan Teeter with the Forest Service, he thinks what might be happening is the California red-legged frogs hear the chorus of tree frogs and go, hey, there's water over there. And by the way, I can go there and eat some tree frogs and have a good lunch.
Yeah, right.
So I think animals use their ears a lot to find these habitats. And again, I think they can sense water. I've been building wetlands in the desert of New Mexico, where there isn't water within 10 miles. And in the middle of construction, the cows will show up. You go, what in the world? I didn't see any cows. And suddenly there's cows. I think they can smell the water, and I think they hear the heavy equipment, and they know something's going on. They're curious. So that's a good thing. Animals can find these things. It helps out. So if anyone's interested in building a wetland in their backyard, I encourage you to try it. You'll be amazed what will come by. Now, everybody gets worried about mosquitoes. Oh my gosh. When I'm working with a principal at a school, number one question, mosquitoes, are they going to be a problem? Everybody knows that mosquitoes breed in wetlands. But wait a minute. Mosquitoes breed in unhealthy wetlands. What we see happening is that mosquitoes will lay their eggs in a wetland. And when they lay their eggs in a wetland, there's something there to eat their eggs. A water boatman, a water strider, the larvae of dragonfly, damselflies, they'll eat the eggs. If the eggs hatch, we have other animals in the wetland that will eat the mosquito larvae. And then if they end up leaving the water and emerging, we'll have the bats and the tree swallows and the purple martins. So what we find out is that a healthy wetland actually reduces mosquito numbers. And I say mosquitoes may check into a wetland, but they won't check out. So where do mosquitoes live? They may live in the bird bath in your backyard. They may be in a gutter that doesn't drain. Or how about a child's plastic toy that has a puddle of water in it? These are all unhealthy wetlands. Or if you have a farm and there's a horse watering trough, they're going to be breeding in there. Or if you have a dog bowl or swimming pool that's not being used, that's where the mosquitoes are breeding, not in a healthy wetland. Another thing naysayers will say about wetland restoration is that they're a drowning risk. After all, everybody knows that you can drown in 6 inches of water. I don't know where that started.
Yeah.
You know, I've given our children years ago baths, and I've given grandchildren baths. What I find out, if they were to tip over in the tub, they get their head above the water within a second. And that's what we see happening, is that if a child were to fall into water, they get their head up right away. I mean, they stand up. So how do people drown in 6 inches of water? I think because they've been drinking a bit too much. Maybe been doing drugs, and they fall over in a bathtub and knock themselves out. Because I've taken thousands of children around wetlands, and I have trouble getting them near the water because they don't want to get their shoes dirty. But once they get into the wetland, they're thrilled. They love what they see. They love catching the larvae. They love seeing all the different animals, the sights, the smells. I mean, the smell of mud in a wetland, maybe you've experienced it. Hydrogen sulfide smells like a baby diaper. And it's just that anaerobic respiration that's going on, but it's a unique smell, and it's a smell that lets us know that, hey, that wetland's functioning the way it should be. Really works.
Do you have any favorite projects that you've worked on? Maybe it's one you've revisited from time to time and enjoyed and experienced the wildlife that has that now has a habitat.
I was recently at Caesar Creek Lake. It's a reservoir managed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers out of Waynesville, Ohio. 3 years ago, I helped them build 3 wetland areas, one right at their visitor center. I had not been back, had not seen photographs. So I went back there a couple of weeks ago, and we are designing new wetland projects. And I was able to visit the existing wetlands that we had built and heard stories about all the different wildlife species that were using them, took all sorts of photographs. But the best was the heavy equipment workers that had helped us build the wetlands. They were with the Ohio Department of Transportation. They were out there for training. They helped us build these wetlands. And they were so excited about what they had done that they were coming back to the wetlands with their families and showing them the wetlands. And I thought, that's really something. I've had heavy equipment operators say that over their lives, they have done more to destroy the environment. And when they help with a wetland project, they say it's the most rewarding thing they've ever done. We get to help the environment. They love it. Many of them are hunters. Many of them will fish, but everybody likes to see animals. And if you want to help animals, restore a wetland, protect a wetland, and you're going to help so many different species.
Everything needs water. And I like saying that, we need to design for hydration instead of designing for drainage. And you're talking about, building a wetland in the desert. It must be that when you scoop out a little bit of ground in the right place, that it catches the rain and becomes a wetland. And so
I'm glad you bring that up. Living here in the East, it appears like we've been getting more frequent rainfall and heavier rainfalls and more frequent flooding. But working in the West, it is the complete opposite. Each year it's drier. Each year the forest fires are worse. And wells that have been producing for over 100 years are going dry. Wetlands that have a history of holding water are going dry. You look at historical aerial photographs of these natural wetlands, and you see that they've held water for 50, 60 years. I'm working on a wetland restoration project now with the Tobacco Plains Indian Band out of Grasmere, British Columbia. And they've asked for my help because they have all these natural wetlands that the elders say have held water for well over 100 years, and now they've gone dry. And they say with the drying of the wetlands, they've lost the turtles. The deer don't come around. The elk don't come around. They're not seeing grizzly bear, and they want to do something about it. So I've been working to develop techniques where it is possible to restore wetlands in arid regions that have been dried through climate change and have also been dried because of human actions of removing water for irrigation. These can be restored, and people are embracing these techniques and starting to use them. If we can hold water on the landscape in the arid West, then that will provide habitat for wildlife, for rare species of plants and animals, and provide water for irrigation. And also they'll be beautiful to look at. So yes, there's a lot that can be done. Now here in the East, majority of our wetlands have been drained. They're not present anymore. Again, you look at the presence of ditches on the landscape. So if we can restore some of these wetlands, we're going to see a lot more wildlife. And I'm working with communities to attenuate flooding using wetlands. Flooding is getting worse. Wetlands are perhaps the lowest cost, most efficient way of controlling flooding. So if you can restore wetland areas, create wetlands, you can reduce flooding in a community. And if you can make a park around the wetland and a trail, you're going to give people a destination where they can walk their dog and see all sorts of animals. It really works. So I'm working right now with Bernheim Research Forest and Arboretum, and we're looking to restore wetlands associated with the spring. The spring was modified over 100 years ago. And the people at Bernheim Forest, they would like to restore the spring and the wetlands and show visitors what a natural spring used to look like in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So spring restoration is another way of restoring wetlands. And I'm hopeful that they will move forward with the project and that all the people that visit Bernheim will be able to see these restored wetlands and to view, the salamanders using them and the dragonflies and everything else. It'd be a really good thing.
So how do you restore, what's the relationship between the spring and the wetland? Is the spring feeding the wetland, and how do you fix it to make the wetland reappear?
That's a good question. Every single spring that I have visited has been altered by humans. And there's good reason. Springs produce good, clean, cool water. So if you were building a home, if you were managing a farm, if you have a ranch, that spring is essential to your livelihood. There was no such thing as city water, years ago in rural areas. So if you had a spring, you would put pipes in it and you would move that water to your house or to your barn or to your fields. And those pipes would be placed underground. You dig ditches to channel that water away. And so when we restore a spring, we dig in the ground and we find those pipes and remove them. We reshape the wetland basins and block the ditches. We loosen compacted soils that have been compacted by livestock, and then you can bring back the native plants. And it's not that difficult because oftentimes these plants, their seeds have remained dormant in the soil. So if we loosen the soil around and in the restored wetlands, then many times we can get these plants to grow, which works out really well.
I'm familiar with your project at Earth and Spirit Center in Louisville, and there's two little ponds. It's like, okay, so those of you who aren't in Louisville, Beargrass Creek is the main watershed in Jefferson County where Louisville is. Beargrass Creek runs past the Earth and Spirit Center at the bottom of the hill, of course. And then there's a floodplain, and then there's a steep hillside. Well, you found a couple of places right next to that steep hillside, scooped them out. And, we're talking about one of them is 40 yards by 20 yards. One of them might be 10 yards by 30 yards. And every time I go down there, they've got water in them. And I see what you're saying about there's no dam involved here. And maybe you did something more. What did you do besides scoop out dirt?
Well, first of all, the project had to be identified. I teach a wetland design course, graduate level course for the University of Louisville Speed School of Engineering. And one of the students was Jake Allgwire, and he was the one that identified the project. He identified it and prepared a design and sent it to me. And he said, this looks like a good project. And I looked at its design and gave him a 100 on it. And I said, you've done a great job here. Would you consider building these wetlands? So he talked to the people at the Earth and Sky Center, and we met on the ground and reviewed it and did a little bit more design work. And we were able to get the funding for the project. And the whole community was involved in restoring these two wetlands that have been drained with ditches. The area used to be farmed. And we restored these wetlands and had more people come out to help with the project and who are still helping to control non-native plants and to establish native plants. And I worked with Jake again, this time at Cedar Creek Lake in Waynesville, Ohio. He's become an engineer with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and now he's restoring wetlands and streams. So it's something, if you learn how to do this, we're more likely to move forward and embrace these projects and get more done. So that's a wonderful place to visit. Great people there. The wetlands look good. They're full of life, but it shows you what can be done in an urban area. Now, even the bigger project would be to restore Beargrass Creek. When we were there building the wetlands, we walked sections of Beargrass Creek, and it's been straightened and moved. In fact, just about every stream in Kentucky, in Tennessee, in Ohio, in Indiana has been moved and channeled for drainage. And they moved and channeled them so they would serve as the outlet for draining wetlands at inland locations. So when you walk a stream and you see that the banks are vertical and eroding, and that the basic shape of the stream is straight, you know that that stream was moved for drainage. So stream restoration is a big deal. And it's an exciting area to get involved in, to actually restore the streams. And you go, well, why do we need to restore the stream? Well, beaver are number one. Beaver used to be all over the Midwest, all over the South. And beaver dammed every single stream. And they made these beautiful wetlands. And when the beaver dams washed out, the wetlands turned to wet meadows. They turned to shrub swamps, to forested swamps. The beaver would return and make the emergent wetlands and the ephemeral wetlands. But beaver were largely eliminated from our landscape because of the fashions, the fur industry. You know, there was so much trapping that took place. And then with the trapping of the beaver, then people were able to dig the ditches to drain the land for farming. And if the beaver returned, people would kill the beaver because they would block the ditches and flood their fields. So we humans have separated wetlands and streams. So when you talk to a professional now, they'll talk about wetland restoration and stream restoration. But the line was blurred when beaver were abundant. When beaver were abundant, the drainages were a cross between wetlands and streams. And entire drainages were series of wetlands. And the historic literature points this out. They said that they weren't able to do anything with the bottomlands because they were swampy and full of beaver. So when people started digging these channels, which we now call streams, they were able to drain them and build their houses on them and farm on them. So I love to see the beaver come back. There are many places where the beaver is not welcome because if they block a culvert, then they flood somebody's backyard. If they block a culvert, a road can wash out. But where beaver are allowed to build their dams, we see some tremendous habitats. So I like to work with stream restoration so that we can reshape the stream so beaver can move in and live and build the wetlands that they're used to building. And that's what we're doing throughout much of the Midwest and Kentucky, is that we're restoring streams. And a real measure of success is when the beaver returns and does what they do best, making these beaver ponds.
Right. So I would love to ask you more about beavers, but we have some questions in the chat. Feel free to put questions in the chat, or if you want to ask a question, let's open it up for anybody to ask questions. In the meantime, I'm going to, let me see.
Would you mind reading them? Or
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
Mateo Milmo says, what are Tom's thoughts on managing livestock on the land? Is he in favor of pasturing livestock? Does he favor higher density mob grazing or keeping heavy hoofed ones off the land?
Well, I have to admit that I eat beef. And somebody has to raise the cows.
Right.
Now, what I've seen is that cows will compact soil. Cows, if allowed to enter wetlands, will muddy the water. They can trample amphibians, reptiles. If cows are allowed to enter water, they defecate in the water. So I work quite a few projects across the West with ranchers where we manage wetlands and we manage livestock. And it's a win-win situation. What we'll do is that come in and they'll show me a pond that was dug years ago that doesn't hold water. And I'll repair it. I'll get it to hold water and shape it like a natural wetland. And then what we'll do is that we'll put a fence around that wetland and we'll make an access ramp. And this access ramp will be graveled and the cows will have access to clean water and not the entire wetland.
Right.
Now that's a good thing because I don't know of a single animal that stays healthy if it drinks its own waste.
Right.
And that's what we found in study after study. If cows are given unlimited access to wetlands and water, they're not healthy. So I remember Joe Thomas, he was with the Menifee County Fish and Game Club, and he told me stories. He has a lot of cows. And he said, Tom, he said, when I built my farm ponds, the cows did better because they had access to water that was cleaner. But when I put in waterers that were supplied with city water, the cows did even better because they had clean water that wasn't contaminated with protozoans. Mm-hmm. And that's what we find out west with the ranchers. We can rebuild their failed ponds to provide perennial water that's clean, and we can give access to the livestock that they'll use. See, if you have a wetland in the West and your cows are allowed unlimited access, likely they'll get stuck in the mud and they can die. When I visit these wetland projects before we complete them, I will find the bones of cows that have been stuck in the mud and die. So when we come in and restore and rebuild the wetlands and eliminate the ditches and do a little bit with access and fences. Now, nobody likes maintaining fences, but fences have their role around water. If you don't do this, every single cow and horse will enter the wetland, and it's like being overdosed. They destroy a good thing for them. Right. So I'm working with many, many people in the West to manage livestock in a way that they have access to the water, it's clean, and we have wonderful habitat for listed species.
Wonderful. Next question from Barbara Berman. Where she's from Louisville. Where's the spring in Burnham? There was a restoration of one of the streams in Burnham 10 or more years ago with a teacher at U of L.
The spring that we are looking to restore, which we've done the design work, but now it's going through the review and approval process. It's located right down the hill from the education center. And it's right opposite Olmsted Pond. Right opposite Olmsted Pond. And there's a building there that was moved in the early 1900s. Well, the building was built in the early 1900s. It was moved and put on top of the spring, I believe, in the 1970s. So it would be good to move that building to another location and then to restore the spring and give people a snapshot of what Kentucky looked like at the time of European settlement. But again, the project, it's not funded at this point, and it's being reviewed. And I know that all the people at Burnham will be looking at it, reviewing it, but I'm hopeful that they'll move forward with it. And I'd sure like to be a part of putting it on the ground.
Matteo Milmo says, where is the course Tom teaches again? What is the course?
I have it on my website. And the course is at the University of Louisville. It's online. And the course is called Wetland Design, graduate level course for engineers. However, it is open to people to register for graduate credit. But I also teach workshops around North America. I have one coming up in the state of Virginia at the Blue Ridge Discovery Center. And I have another workshop coming up in Ohio. And this one is associated with an event called Vernal Palooza. And a vernal pond is an ephemeral wetland, provides great habitat to amphibians and crustaceans. And we're having a 3-day event in Ohio called Vernal Palooza. And we're going to be building a vernal pond or a wetland as part of this training. And I'll go ahead and list that on my website for people to look at, which is www.wetlandrestorationandtraining.com. Wetlandrestorationandtraining.com. And I try to keep it up to date. I'm a little bit behind, so I have to add some things to it, like Vernal Palooza, as well as the Blue Ridge Discovery Center workshop in Virginia. And if somebody is interested in hosting a wetland workshop, it's a great way to get a wetland built on your property or the area that you managed. And it's a wonderful way to get together. Barn raising, we think, oh, what a wonderful event. Well, why don't we consider wetland restoration as a community event where we can all build a wetland together and then share photos of it in the years to come. And these workshops are quite popular, and they really show people, it's like a Habitat for Humanity, but for wetlands, how we can build these wetlands.
Sounds good. I'll make every effort to follow up on those. Mateo Melmo asked a related question that you may have already answered. What books or sources would you recommend for someone wanting to develop engineering knowledge regarding wetland restoration?
Oh, what a great question. You go to my website and you'll see the books that I've written that are listed. One is called Wetland Drainage, Restoration and Repair. The other book is Wetland Restoration and Construction, a technical guide. And these are low-priced, interested reading. I mean, the stories in them, you're going to love them, and you're going to come away with enough information to get out there, design and build a wetland. Plus, attend one of the courses that I teach, and you'll see that this is something really worthwhile.
Kevin asks, what implements do you favor to loosen soil in compacted wetlands, and how deep do you loosen the profile?
Oh, that's a good one. Kevin, remember rough and loose. Rough and loose is a technique that was developed by David Polster in British Columbia, Canada. And what you do is you take an excavator and an excavator bucket, and you sink that bucket into the ground, a digging bucket with teeth. And you sink it into the ground about 1 meter, and you lift up vertically. You don't turn the soil like you would turn it in a garden. You loosen it. And what we find out is that almost all soil associated with rangeland and agricultural land has been compacted. And when you compact soils, it actually causes greater erosion, lower plant survival, lower plant germination. So David Polster came up with this technique of rough and loose, and we use it on all our projects now. We loosen that soil, we maintain the horizons, and we find that the plants will seed in on their own. They'll germinate. When there's a rain, the water soaks into the ground. We don't even have to use mulch anymore because this technique is so effective. And it just pains me when I look at engineering plans and I see they want to compact the soils and then seed them. That's a recipe for erosion. You need to go the other way and loosen the soils so the water soaks into the ground. So I have a tool I use to measure compaction called a penetrometer. And if I go into a wooded area and push that into the ground, the soils may be compacted to 10 or 20 pounds per square inch. But when I go into an open area like a field and push that penetrometer into the ground, it'll be 200 to 300 pounds per square inch of compaction. So we can quantify this. So the rough and loosen technique is really, I teach that at the workshops and the training, and we use it with all our wetland projects. Thank you.
Barbara asks, what is the difference between a wetland and a pond? Is it the depth?
Okay. Really, a wetland is a pond, and a pond is a wetland. But now, if you want to get into the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers definition of what is a jurisdictional wetland, then the cutoff is about 6 foot in depth. So if you have a pond deeper than 6 foot, the Army Corps of Engineers may not consider the whole pond wetland. They may consider the edge of it wetland. So I think it's okay to call wetlands ponds and ponds wetlands. It's just a common thing to do. But I'd really like to see people who have farm ponds on their property transform these into living wetlands. And they're going to see so much more wildlife. Let's get rid of these dams. Let's restore these wetlands. And they won't have the maintenance. I mean, if you've ever mowed a dam, it scares you to death. Oh, mowing a dam, you're afraid you're going to tip over, or if you have to use a trimmer, and you don't have to do that anymore. We can get you out of that.
Right. What type of equipment do you use? Do all projects involve heavy equipment?
I have built a handful of wetlands using shovels. In fact, I remember one project in California at a school. They said, Tom, we're not using heavy equipment. I said, okay, I want you to bring a class out to me every half hour for 3 days in a row. And I taught the students how to use a shovel, how to use a rake. And I think many of them recognized that they don't want to go into labor for a living because they really didn't like using a shovel. So what do I use? An excavator, a good size, actually a large excavator. And for big wetland projects, an excavator and a dozer. The dozer pushes the soil, the excavator digs and sorts the soil. So those two pieces of heavy equipment.
What is an excavator?
Some people call it a track hoe.
Or a backhoe?
No, a backhoe is on rubber tires.
Okay.
And rubber tires, they don't work good for building wetlands because the rubber tires compact the soil and their movements are really jerky. They're not at all efficient. So an excavator is what you see, on almost any construction site in the Midwest. You'll see an excavator. Sometimes you'll see a dozer. But excavator has this big steam shovel type bucket with teeth on it. And they just work really well. Right. Very smooth, all run with hydraulics. In fact, I'd love to buy one, but they're too expensive.
What type of person or entity reaches out to you for a possible project? And what projects are you expecting to undertake in the near future?
What type of person? Somebody who loves the environment, somebody who wants to make a difference, somebody who is so dedicated that they will volunteer their time to make something happen. What projects do I have coming up in the future? We're going to be building wetlands in another week in Arizona for the endangered Chiricahua leopard frog. I have projects coming up in Ohio, Virginia, Rhode Island, Kentucky, just a variety of locations. Hopefully we'll be building those wetlands for the California red-legged frog in Mexico. And I've been talking to people in the country of Chile who want to restore wetlands. So they all have this interest in helping the environment, whether they're restoring or creating, and they feel that they can do something about it, and they can.
What type of help do you need? Are there opportunities for young people to get involved in the work?
Oh, I need all sorts of help. I would really like somebody to take over writing for me, but I haven't found that person yet. Writing's a lot of work. I really like digging holes in the ground, not sit in front of the computer for day after day. But are there opportunities? I don't have any employees. However, all these federal and state agencies hire people who are involved in stream and wetland restoration. And the key to getting these jobs is, of course, to get that college degree, but more importantly, to have on-the-job experience. So people will apprentice with me. I keep them up to date on the projects I'm working on, and they come out and volunteer, and they learn how to build wetlands by building wetlands. It's not easy, but you'll gain the skills. There is no university I know of that offers a program in wetland or stream restoration. Some universities offer an occasional class, but those are the ones that I'm teaching, that occasional class. So really you have to get on the ground. Now, most people don't want you to come out on a wetland project site because they're not sure what they're doing is going to work. And I'm not that way. I believe in adaptive management. Once you start digging, you come up with these techniques, you know what to do, and you get that wetland to perform as planned. So I welcome people to come out on my projects, and I can keep them up to date on the projects, and we'll build wetlands together.
Let's say you were king of the world for 4 years. What would you like to see happen? What policies would you put into place to change the world in the direction of your dreams?
I've thought about that. That's something. What I would do is set up a major fund, and we would have training sessions and start college programs on wetland and stream restoration. And if one of the graduates of this program were interested in building a wetland, that program would provide the funding to them so they could build their first wetland. And then we would help them with future wetlands. Now, I love birds and I love listening to birds. And it all started when I took an ornithology class in college. So I think if we offered courses on wetland and stream restoration at more universities and colleges and technical centers, we'd have all sorts of people building wetlands and ponds, which would be a good thing. But I guess I need to start playing the lottery to make that happen.
Tom, if you have just a few more minutes, we have
Sure.
2 or 3 or more questions and comments. Mateo Melmo says, I'd be pleased to host a wetland restoration workshop in northern Mexico. I work in semi-arid northern eastern Mexico in the states of Nuevo Leon and Coahuila. Coahuila.
Oh, you pronounce better than I do.
Let me know if you're interested in being part of one
Yes.
in the future. What are your thoughts on ripping the land, if appropriate, on contour keyline style to promote water infiltration? What do you consider the most effective way to manage overflow in a wetland context? Would implementing some damming works in dry land context be beneficial and worthwhile to promote wetland creation in dried out locations?
Well, first of all, I would be happy to help with this program in Mexico. Send an email to me with details. That would be really good. My email is tom@biebighauser@gmail.com. Go ahead and send an email to me. As far as ripping on contours, it's better than not ripping, but I think there's better ways. This rough and loosen technique works a lot better because when you rip something, you don't loosen the soils the way you do with the rough and loosen technique. So I think that'd be a good study. I have done a lot of ripping with dozers, but I find with plows, they don't go deep enough. And really with most dozers, they don't go deep enough. So I think the rough and loosen technique works out better. Now, I think the other part of the question was about how water leaves wetland areas. Oh, that's a whole presentation right there. How do you manage water that flows out of a pond or a wetland so it doesn't cause erosion and so it provides even improved habitat for fish and wildlife? And we're doing that. But that's a whole nother topic that we could talk about in the future, because really what we're looking at there is stream restoration. Pretty exciting.
Here's a question. Is a developer retention pond a wetland? What can be done to retention ponds to improve the ecology?
You know, probably what can be done is to require that every person developing these stormwater ponds attend training in wetland restoration, because people will build a home for $300,000-$400,000 and they have to overlook the ugliest stormwater pond you've ever seen,
right,
with vertical banks, armored with white limestone rock, surrounded by a big fence. No one says that stormwater ponds have to look like that. So what I do is that I build stormwater ponds that are really wetlands. And they don't have the concrete water control structures. They don't have the dams. They don't have the riprap, and they function better than these constructed stormwater ponds.
Wow.
And they're beautiful to look at.
Right.
In fact, they actually increase property values if you have a view of them. So that's a great workshop right there. In fact, I've taught some of these workshops building wetlands instead of the ugly stormwater ponds, and they're quite popular. But we have to get the people there that are designing them.
Yeah, you said it seems like you could make a business out of that, because developers have to they have to do some sort of water mitigation.
Right.
He says,
Yes.
Kevin says, do you advocate using wetlands banking or wetlands preserve programs, or just get it done?
Well, I believe the wetland mitigation banking is important, because if the agencies make the decision that the wetlands are going to be destroyed, if they're going to give the permits, then the banking and the mitigation is really important to do, because otherwise then we are losing all our wetlands. And unfortunately, we really don't have wetland banking or mitigation in many other countries. So basically they're losing wetlands, and they're not replacing them. Where here in the US, it's a good thing, because if wetlands are going to be destroyed, then others will be built to replace them. So do I support it? Yes, I think that's a wonderful program to be able to do that.
Amina Sena, who is a hydrologist in Santa Fe, says, can you please expand on the frog project in Arizona? Also, have you restored fins?
Okay, the project that we're going to be building is in Hereford at the Beatty Guest Ranch. And it's a cooperative project with Arizona Game and Fish, Bat Conservation International, and others. And the reason we're building the wetlands, 2 of them, is to provide critical habitat for the Chiricahua leopard frog, a threatened species. And then I'll also be doing design work in the week prior to this project. And then I'll be returning later on in the year to build additional wetlands for the Chiricahua leopard frog in Arizona. Now, the other part of that question, Hart, was, I missed it.
Okay, let me check it again. Have you restored fens, F-E-N-S?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I've restored fens and bogs and forest and swamps, and yeah, it's something. But there isn't much demand for it. I really like to restore forested wetlands or swamps, but it's rare somebody wants a forested wetland or swamp. And that's the problem with restoring a wetland. Somebody has to pay for it. And if your client or your landowner says, I don't want a swamp, well, now what's happening is ephemeral wetlands are becoming much more popular. And I'm restoring more and more ephemeral wetlands or vernal ponds. And they're relatively inexpensive to build. And people are amazed at what they see. So yeah, if there's a fen restoration, I'm on board. Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to work it.
Let me see. I think that's all of our questions. Tom, this has been wonderful. Does anybody else have any questions? If you want to unmute yourself, we'll take a couple more questions, and then I think maybe Tom has a life apart from this Zoom call.
Well, I want to thank everybody for listening. I mean, with no visuals, just talking. I really appreciate it. You folks are really dedicated for being on this call.
Tom, I love your positive energy. I mean, you're obviously just in love with what you do and in love with the natural world. And this group is Water and Climate. And it's, based on the idea that water is life and we need to capture rainwater where it falls. We need to design more for hydration instead of designing for drainage. And, and you're just right in the thick of all that.
Thank you. Very good.
I guess that's everything. Let me see. Okay, so somebody Robin Knox, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say hi, aloha, and thank you for this wonderful session. I'm super excited. I'm writing you an email right now.
Thanks, Robin.
Yes, I'm with Save the Wetlands Hui on Maui, and we're definitely going to try to get you over here to do a workshop.
Oh, Robin, I have a secret to tell you. On my bucket list, I would like to build a wetland in every state, and I didn't think it would ever be possible to build one in Hawaii.
Well, we need it on the dry side.
It'd be something.
Okay, great. Yeah, look for my email.
Thank you, Robin.
Anybody else want to unmute yourself and ask a question? There's Nick.
I had a question. What are your thoughts, Tom, on biochar? And for example, when roughening up and loosening the soil, adding some inoculated biochar in there. What do you think about, decentralizing the production of biochar, by utilizing that gasifier syngas that comes out of the wood when you gasify it? And you could be taking, prunings from the forest and agricultural residues, turning that into fuel, and then creating biochar in a decentralized fashion where then you can be, putting it back into the soil.
I've worked a number of projects where we transport in woody debris. Let's say that they're building a new ski hill and they have all this wood that they're going to burn. Well, we have them bring it into our wetland restoration area, and then we use the rough and loosen technique, and then we mix it all in. And I've worked other projects where we've buried wood chips in the bottoms of wetlands, and also, in the bottoms of streams, and we're working to remove nitrogen from the water. So yes, I think that's really great what you're talking about there.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Really great to hear your presentation again. And the workshop I did with you here in California years ago was very impactful, and hope to do another. My question is, can you, if I was entrepreneurially minded, you think there's any good thinking around wetland banking to buy and restore wetlands for the wetland banking sector? Any thoughts on that?
I know a number of people that have set up wetland mitigation banks. Personally, I'm not going to do that because I don't build wetlands for profit. I'm not interested in making money off of wetland loss. So I'm happy that people are willing to set up these banks. And I've seen some really good ones. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, like I would want to add that there are already projects being developed that are gonna, basically launch as a digital company where they're gonna be using satellites to map out, changes in the Earth's greenery, and they're gonna be able to measure a lot of things via satellite, and those works are gonna be representing and sort of mining what are gonna be called shift coins. And so these shift coins are going to be, basically mined by people that do restorative projects worldwide and are actively working, to further ecological restoration. And so I think there's already, different entrepreneurial ideas being developed. You just have to, watch out for them. This project that I'm telling you about is being developed by the people at Verge Permaculture, Rob and Dakota Cohen. And I think they've organized and associated themselves with one of the founders of Ethereum. And so they're going to be launching this fifth world project with the shift coins pretty soon. So I think those kind of projects are pretty exciting. And, there's a lot of potential of not really doing it for profit, but creating value around the act of ecological restoration. And with blockchain and the use of different technologies, that could be a reality, so and that could shift, the way we trade and value basically living capital and, financial capital as well. And I think there is a need to sort of breach professional, ecological restoration businesses or entrepreneurs, people that want to create value for society in different ecological ways, and basically bringing forth social and ecological justice, which is really very needed. And so I think developing different ways to do that is should be welcomed.
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm for anything that gets people outdoors into wetlands. I think that's the important thing right there.
Yeah. I mean, you got to build them first and create a whole culture around ecology and caring for Mother Earth and, our wetlands and our watersheds and just that living capital, which we depend upon. And that's a whole, educational and social, cultural challenge, which has to be addressed. I mean, we can be building wetlands while that occurs, but for your dream of people being out there walking wetlands, we have to focus on that bigger challenge as well.
Very good.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really enjoyed tonight's talk, and I hope we get to meet each other and restore some wetlands.
Very good.
Thank you, Mateo.
Thank you, Tom. Really enjoyed tonight's talk.
Me too. Thank you for joining us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think we probably ought to wrap it up. We can take one more question if anybody has one.
I have a quick question. I'm Kevin over in Wyoming, and really like the using Excavator as a broad fork. We do that partially because it horrifies people and makes it look like we turn the world over. But what is there a preferred seed mix that we can broadcast, or primary succession wetlands flora species that we should be enabling to help get things started?
Oh, yes. Some of the most enjoyable projects that I've worked on, while we're building the wetland, we will go to a natural area and collect seed by hand and then sow it in and around our project. So if you know of some native prairies, native rangeland, wetlands, and you can get out there in the fall and collect bags of seed. I just completed a major project in Canada where we removed 4 dams, and all of our seed was collected on site, which is a really good thing. So I think that, there's quite an abundance of seed near many of our work areas that with a little bit of work, we can collect it and, get a local genotype and really help the environment.
Thank you for your time today and your expertise. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin.
Hey, Kevin, I'd like to know a little bit more about this concept of using the excavator as a broad fork. How do you go about doing that?
I think basically that's what Tom was talking about, permaculture techniques with a broad fork to lift and fracture, which is also the yeoman's plow ripper in a wet environment. Tom is advocating using the bucket straight in, up and down to lift and fracture, but not invert or pulverize. So it's a great application, and I agree 100%, I guess. So
so when you're trenching like that, do you like lay down whatever you're taking out on top, or do you put it like downhill and create sort of a berm?
Well,
I'll probably leave it up to Tom, but yeah, you're basically going in and out, just lifting and fracturing without, but go ahead, Tom. Yeah,
you're right. It's something I've had to write this up for different contracts, and I also have video showing it in many images. In fact, I teach this technique now to people how to use it, and it's something, because every time I'm on a project, the operators have not used it. So I teach the heavy equipment operators, and it's amazing how quickly they catch on. And our goal with every one of our projects is that there will be no heavy equipment tracks visible. And once we finish a project, there are no rubber tire tracks anywhere on the whole project. All the soils are loosened. And when you explain that to the heavy equipment operators, get rid of all your tracks by loosening the soil, they will, and they'll do a wonderful job of it, and the results are worthwhile.
Okay. Wow, that sounds interesting. And do you put like something down, or how do you manage for them to not compact at all? Because you have 2 wheels and you're gonna be doing like a central trench. So do you have any
No, you can, the way an excavator can swing, you don't have to go back at all. I've restored well pads, oil and gas well pads, and we don't have a single track mark when we're done. And we've distributed all sorts of woody debris and slash on it, and restored all sorts of wetlands. And it's like washing the kitchen floor. You start at the far end, and you work your way out backwards. You don't walk over that wet floor. And You know, people will say, "Oh, I want to use a straw blower." Well, why? That is rubber tires. You're going to compact the soils. We don't want to use a straw blower. You don't need a straw blower when you use the rough and loosen technique.
Okay. Well, I'm going to be researching those techniques and, you know, learning more about them because I want to learn how to operate, build.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Me too.
Thank you.
Tom, I'm going to make it a point to participate in your projects in Kentucky.
Good.
Or possibly Southern Indiana or Ohio.
Good.
So Liliana Pimentel says, thank you very much for the session and the time. What else did she say? I do also apologize for the beginning, as sometimes Zoom on the phone turns it on without notice. So thank you. So I guess that's everything. It's Tom, thank you so much for joining us. I echo what everybody else says. It's been very much an education and an inspiration. And it's great that you give us so many ways to take action and to follow up. And so hope to talk with you again soon.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you for joining us, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye now.